Now that we've created our database, set up the SQL structure, created a data dictionary, created tables, interfaces where users can input queries, well, we've essentially got the next step where we test our creation. And database developers, along with DBAs, will get involved in making sure that our new database does exactly what it's supposed to do for the users. When it comes to testing and supporting our database, we need an administrator. So let's move on to the role of the mighty DBA. One thing to remember, however, is that in this arena of database technology, there are actually two types of administrator. That's worth knowing. So stepping back just a little before I dive into all of this, let's remind ourselves of what the term administrator actually means. Administrator in IT essentially means I didn't design it, I didn't build it, I just look after the end product. I'm the housekeeper keeping the technology running smoothly. So that's what an administrator does. So a network administrator means I didn't design or create this network in the first place, but now that it's in place, I will look after it, I will keep it running and look after its health. Same with the term web administrator, systems administrator, and so on. However, what I've just said certainly doesn't do the role of database administrator justice, certainly not in our particular context. Most of you know exactly what the duties are of a DBA to a certain extent. So they define the strategies for backup and recovery, they optimize the storage structure and delivery strategy, and they get involved in capacity planning. But there is a lot more we need to absorb when it comes to understanding the role of the modern 21st century database administrator. And as I said, the key thing to remember is that there are ostensibly two types of DBAs in our entire database project lifecycle. The first of these is what we call a development DBA. A development DBA, this particular type of DBA, comes into play during the testing phase of the cycle. In other words, once much of the development has been completed, the database has taken shape, but it is far from being signed off as a fully tested and fully quality assured product. So development DBAs used to be called testing DBAs. They get involved almost during the development process and coming up to the end of the development process. So as I said, they are now more often referred to as development DBAs. And a development DBA, just to summarize, is someone who gets involved with the database when it is approaching completion, but it is not as yet operational in a live environment. And so it's currently not having any direct business impact at this point. In fact, the users may not even have seen this database working as a prototype yet. Development DBAs will often help out during the build itself. So they will have many of the skills that a database developer will have, if not to the same degree. They will provide assistance in both cleaning up the code and even in the data modeling higher up the development stream. As I said, in some cases, they might even aid in the original feasibility and analysis, where they might even get involved in interviewing users because it's an agile environment. So they will help with the analysis and they'll help construct the logical data models and entity relationship diagrams. Development DBAs will get involved very often with user liaison and needs analysis if they are working that far upstream. And as I said, especially with the rise of agile and DevOps environments, modern DBAs will often be required to get involved in all sorts of interactions with the users, which was unheard of back in the day before agile. So today's DBAs will need exposure to agile, rational unified programming, pair programming, test-driven development, and BDD development environments. Because they appear near the end of the core coding in most classical environments, they will also get involved with feeding dummy data or test data into the database and then start to observe how it's performing. So development DBAs will be very proficient in writing SQL scripts of the type that we mentioned earlier and of the type that will be used by the business and the end user. And they will then test the database against the sorts of scripts and stored procedures that users will be using in a live operational environment. Before we move on to the second type of DBA, a quick word at this stage about the testing of databases. This is huge. It's a huge part of the DBA role. When a database DBA is testing the database, they do so in many of the traditional methods that are used by the software testers in other areas. So you'll see the same sort of testing terms appearing on database administrator CVs. So terms such as black box testing, white box testing, clear box testing will all turn up on these CVs as well. Now, the other thing to mention is that there are also some testing terms just specific to the area of database testing, such as acid testing, and I need to show you these now. Okay, for those of you who haven't done the other masterclasses, the following are essentially the same terms that you might see in software testing and that you should make yourself very familiar with, especially if you're looking into recruiting the whole area of database administrators. So in testing, you have black box and UAT. These are essentially the same thing. What black box testing or user acceptance testing means is essentially testing the software after it's finished. As the name implies, it's a finished product or almost a finished product, and they would test it in the way that you and I as users might test your recruitment management system or any other software. We would be in front of it, we would play with it, we would try and break it, but if it went wrong, we wouldn't know what's gone wrong inside. We are only black box testing it. We're testing the black box, we don't know what's going on inside. A certain number of DBAs will have been involved in black box testing of the database. This is quite different to clear box or white box testing. Now, white box testing is the opposite in the sense to black box testing, in that when things go wrong, those people do open up the system and look inside so they know exactly what's going on. The other name for this is technical testing or non-functional testing. Yes, there are loads of different terms in testing that essentially mean the same thing. Clear box is another term here as well. So, just to summarize so far, functional means I'm looking at it from the user perspective, I can test the database and try and break it and see the obvious flaws. If it goes wrong, I don't know what's going on inside, so I will need to probably invoke a clear box or a technical or non-functional or white box tester, because those people can look inside the product. Another type of testing is what we call regression testing. Now, this happens a lot with databases, and regression testing simply means testing a product once we have made an external change to the product. So it could be that we have bolted on something to the finished product, or we have changed the finished product again in a way which wouldn't have been expected before. So if you make an enhancement to the product, or let's say there is a plugin that is being added onto the database, for example, let's say there was an artificial intelligence search plugin that Google has come up with. And if you can then attach it to your recruitment management system, it will do the searches in a much more intelligent and swifter way than humans. Well, we might want to plug that onto our database, but we would still need to do a regression test to make sure that nothing else has gone wrong within the database itself. That's regression testing.